to talk about working creatively with thinking. And a large part of our meditation practice is getting to know the movements of the mind. And we've probably been experiencing that already this evening in the sit. This thing that we call thinking. And after all, this thinking is the natural expression of the mind, and it's probably pretty familiar to most of us. And sometimes that's not in a good way as well, that it's familiar to us. And it's also, as many of us know, what leads to a lot of our suffering. And so for many of us, working with thinking ends up comprising a large part of our practice. When we start meditating, it's often a shock to us just how much thought dominates awareness. And we realize then just how much it dominates our daily lives. It actually took me a really long time to form a healthy relationship with thinking after I started meditating. It was a real challenge for me because there just seemed to be so much of it happening all the time, and it seemed really chaotic. And back then it was definitely a matter of the quantity of thinking, not quality. And it became apparent to me after practicing for a while that the habit of thinking was one way that I tried to maintain really tight control over my life. And this planning mind that was my particular speciality was the perfect vehicle for maintaining this illusion or that illusion of a control. So for all of us, the quality of our thoughts say a lot about the state of our hearts and minds. So our thoughts reflect our worldview and vice versa. And we can say too that our collective thinking, so our cultural views and beliefs and values, also affects what we think personally to a huge degree. It's like, we might call it the mental soup that we're swimming in, that we grow up in, we get educated in, and we work in day to day, etc. And this, of course, is also deeply associated and linked with language and our understanding of words and phrases and what gets sort of imprinted on the mind from a really early age. So there's a lot to work with here in our practice when it comes to thinking. But I want to focus here in this talk tonight on the particular talent and the habit our human minds have in utilizing thought to keep building a narrative about who we think we are. Believing our thoughts keeps us locked into certain views and perceptions. Because we think the thoughts are me or belong to me or somehow that they are mine. And this identification and if you like, appropriation, calling something mine, calling these thoughts mine, this appropriation of thoughts has been happening most of our lives to the point that we don't see it. We grow up saying, I'm this is me, this is mine. It's a convention of our language. And of course we need that for our day-to-day lives. But what I'm talking about here is when we identify with thoughts and appropriate them, take to be mean to mean something about me and my world, that the problems arise. So rather than seeing that thoughts simply arise according to the law of conditionality, that is, they bubble up according to the myriad causes and conditions of our life, that they're not personal, we mistakenly cling to them as me and mine, and this is what keeps us entangled in habitual thought streams that lead us into, often very familiar cycles of suffering and distress and unease. And I just want to mention here too that it's a common expectation for many of us, and this has maybe happened to you, it certainly happened to me, that once one starts meditating, we have this expectation that thoughts are going to somehow disappear. And before long, you'll be sitting down to this, clear, luminous mind. In fact, many people think they can't meditate because they think too much. My sisters said this to me as well. I can't meditate, I think too much. And in fact, in meditation generally, we are training the mind to settle and to stop throwing up so much stuff in the way of thoughts and images. And this, of course, is the aim of serenity or concentration practices. And this settling and calming is really powerful in fostering an experience of collectedness or unification of the mind, which is, of course, the translation of the Pali and Sanskrit word samadhi. And so a certain amount of serenity of the body and the mind is beneficial, and it's actually necessary to a degree for insight to arise. But for the purposes of insight, it doesn't really matter whether thoughts are present in the mind or not. Because with insight practices, we train in seeing clearly, and this is what the word vipassana means insight, to see clearly. We're training in seeing clearly what is actually happening and what our relationship with it is. Yeah. So in this sense, it doesn't matter what is happening, i.e. whether there's a thought in the mind or not, but how we relate to it and how we respond to what's happening. So there are many ways we can work with the movements of the mind to cultivate insight. For example, we can observe the qualities of the thoughts, whether it's past thinking, future thinking, so ruminating, remembering, or planning. We can check out whether the thought stream is fast or slow, whether it's appearing in the form of words or commentary or images. We might even get curious about where thoughts appear, how they appear to us, where do they appear in the mind. Another way we can work with the thought stream is to observe the mind states themselves. So this is working with this constellation of body sensations and feeling tone and emotion and the thoughts themselves to see what mind state arises from this constellation. Or we can work with the energy or the emotion that feeds some of our obsessive thinking. So there's quite a lot of ways we can work with the movements of the mind. But what I want to talk about tonight is one way that I've found really helpful and really powerful over the years that helps foster this insight into the conditionality, the causes and conditions of, and the empty nature of experience. And it also helps loosen identification with thinking generally, is what I've found. And this is using the lens of what we call the three characteristics or marks of existence. So this is the mark of anicca, impermanence, the mark of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, and the mark of anatta, or not self. And collectively in Pali, these are called tilakkhana, the three marks of existence. So often in practice we use serenity practices in order to gain insight into the three characteristics or marks as like underlying patterns, if you like, of our existence. However, we can also use them creatively as particular ways of looking, as particular ways of seeing that help transform our understanding. And this is what I'm exploring here with you tonight. And when we use the three marks of existence in this way, as a way of looking, it can help bring liberation from the entanglements of our thought streams. So let's look at these three briefly together. So this mark of anicca, impermanence. So often we get caught up in the content of a thought. So let's say, for example, that a familiar thought arises. This thought for me is, I need more time. And I feel its familiar push and pull. You know, this, I can feel this in the body as soon as I say that. I need more time. I can feel that in the body and the mind straight away. It's sort of this feeling of being hemmed in or pushed up the road by an impending deadline. And the sensations arise of tightness, of contraction, heat, and there's a sort of a frozenness in the body. So right there with that description, you might see how the conditioned or dependently arisen nature of experience comes into being as a result of recognizing this thought in the mind. I need more time. You know, it's just 4 words, and yet it can have such power in creating a response immediately in the body and the mind. So this bubble arises from conditions. I didn't ask for the thought to arise, but before I know it, my reaction to it has created a cascade of feeling, in this case unpleasantness, of all these, this field of sensations that has arisen as a result of the thought, and a mind state of sometimes overwhelm. And all of this can keep feeding similar thinking if it goes unnoticed. Yeah. So it might end up in thoughts like, why do I never have enough time? I need to organize my life better. Or I can't work under pressure like that, like this. You know, all this kind of thinking might come from that original thought if it's unexamined. So in this scenario, the thought has a certain power over me. It's created a situation that feels solid, and if it's a familiar thought, it probably feels somewhat permanent. You know, it's like, oh, here it is again. Here's that thought again. This is how my life is. This is how I am. But if I look more closely, and this is what we're building the capacity to do in our mindfulness practice, I can see that this thought is just a bubble of energy in the mind. It's arising and passing away according to conditions, fleeting and ephemeral. So it's here and then it's gone. So, but even if it arises 10 or 20 times a day, it's there unbidden and then it's gone. So the fact that I think this thought is solid and always in my life, that I keep believing it, I keep believing this story of it. And because I keep believing it, I keep falling prey to its power over me. As in, I keep falling into the familiar pattern of following this constellation of feeling and sensations, etc., that arise as a result. And I keep reacting habitually to all of that. And probably I keep reacting in a similar way each time because of the familiarity of it. I know how the story goes. Yeah. But if, on the other hand, I stop to ask, where is that thought now, even 5 seconds later, it would give us a clue as to its true nature. So it's just this bubble in the mind, and a very fleeting bubble at that. It's here and then gone. When we look for it in the mind, where is it? So the huge amount of clinging and therefore dukkha, or this, you know, this suffering that arises with such a thought, if it's unexamined, can be lessened just like this in a moment of seeing more clearly by questioning its solidity. So just like this, we can attune awareness to more and more moments of each day and see in them the fleeting, ever-changing nature of experience. And then what if we then applied the perception or the lens of the second mark of existence, of dukkha, of suffering, to look at this same thought, I need more time. By believing the thought, again, I need more time, I think I can maneuver life generally, and my life more specifically, to actually find a sense of satisfaction. And the obvious answer here to this dilemma, or so the mind thinks, is if I had more time, I could do, fill in the gap, do a better job, be a better person, excel at this task, etc., etc. And I think the list goes on ad infinitum. We can fill in the gap as much as we want, because the self is wanting this certainty all the time. We're trying desperately to find satisfaction in believing this thought. We want to hold on to the belief in that thought at whatever cost. But try as we might, reacting to I need more time is only ever going to bring greater unease, because it comes from a sense of lack. This situation isn't good enough somehow, or life should be some other way than it is right now. And this is where turning to dukkha, to unsatisfactoriness, this second mark of existence, as a way of seeing can help, I think. By recognizing that all experience is ultimately unreliable. We can't rely on any of our thoughts to bring us satisfaction in a long-term sense, because it's fleeting and changeable. Going back to the first mark of existence, because of the impermanence of the thinking, they can't bring us any true deep ease. To see that there's unsatisfactoriness built into the nature of the thought itself, because it's fleeting and because its content arises from fear and a sense of lack, can immediately bring us space and lightness and some sense of freedom. And I found here that a helpful question can be, where is the clinging now? So what's the craving or the wanting in the thought? Because it's the clinging to experience that entangles us in dukkha, entangles us in a sense of unease. So if I can turn towards the thought and actually feel the unpleasantness of it in the mind, the desire to get rid of the unpleasant feeling, and if I can feel the rub of it, the friction of it in the body, notice the sensations that are present. Simply turning towards thought like this and allowing it and feeling it as much as possible, and actually being present to its painful qualities. That sense of I need more time, it can sting in a way. So noticing that this is what we run from, this sting, and this is why we generally try to outmaneuver life in some way, to not have to feel what is painful. And this turning towards and allowing, which is one of the really truly radical aspects of the Buddha's teaching, I feel, can also immediately release us from so much suffering associated with believing in the power of a thought bubble. And we'll notice that release always, I think, in a certain degree of relaxation and softening in the body, and an associated softening and opening in the mind somehow. And we might also notice it in the heart, a sense of, or a feeling of more ease and spaciousness, again a softening of the heart. And if we sense into this, the self-sense in that moment of opening and softening, we might sense an ungripping regarding the sense of self, a loosening of identification with the thought, and a lessening of the self-fabricating process somehow. So taking that same thought again, we can look at the third mark of existence, this third characteristic of existence, of not self, anatta. And we can ask, is this thought me, and is it mine? And we might answer, well, no, it's not me, but it feels like mine, because it's happening in here. Thoughts happening in here behind my eyes. It feels like it belongs to me. Yeah. But is this true? Can we really call a thought mine? So and this drives up a questioning about where this thought comes from. How did it arise? And again, if we see that the thought simply arose out of a myriad of causes and conditions, and some are personal conditions, but many are cultural and social, more wide-ranging conditions. And that some of these conditions, prize this thing we call time, for example, in my particular thought. I need more time. That we are told we never have enough of it. And, we know that modern life is always crammed to the rafters with things, with lists that we never have enough time for. So if we look at this, this myriad of causes and conditions of our particular thoughts, how can it possibly be my thought? And this points, of course, to this third characteristic. Because everything we know is impermanent, including thoughts, and therefore can't be relied upon to bring satisfaction, to bring long-lasting ease, how could it possibly be me, or owned by me, or be mine? We suffer when we keep coming face to face with this fleetingness of life, because we keep believing that we can find satisfaction in it somehow, somewhere in our bodies, our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, our beliefs and our views, and in our consciousness of all that. We keep believing that we can find satisfaction in these places. But the reality is that all these things keep changing. They keep arising and disappearing and changing in form. We keep losing them. And yet we keep clinging to them as if finally one day something will change and we will find happiness there somewhere. So in using this not self characteristic as a way of seeing thinking, a useful phrase I've found to be, a thought is just a thought. Or more recently, I've been using the phrase "not me, not mine" to relate, to refer to thoughts or to any other experience. This can be really helpful to loosen that sense of identification we have with experience. This is not me, it's not mine, it's not myself. We see it arising, we see it disappearing, and we leave it be, we don't get involved. When we don't get involved or entangled, we're free. We can be aware of the thought arising without it having any habitual power over us. So in summary, it doesn't mean that we stop thinking and that's how thinking stops running our lives, but rather it's that we stop believing that the thoughts are permanent and reliable and that they're personal. And when we see them in the light of insight, as in this clear-eyed awareness like this, thoughts can be seen as just like the weather, passing through. Some are pleasant, some are unpleasant, some are confused, but none are to be held on to. Okay, thank you for listening.